Hello viewers and welcome to another episode of Trashtalk on Flying Circus, Flight Hazards Special, where I talk about the planes in the book. Oh yes, it has certainly been a while since the last hiatus, and of course, with the Flight Hazards plane pack out, I have to talk about the insanity within this plane pack and, give me a moment. Okay, now that that's out of my system, let's start this off with the RWA-0 Flyvefisk. No, the frame didn't collapse, it just looks like this. Roll, Scout, served with, Fokker Kingdoms, first flight, 1572, strengths, fast, stable, weaknesses, mediocre handling. Among the innumerable strange creatures that swim the dark sea are a wide variety of flying fish, which can be seen breaking the surface of the inky water in great shoals. Rather than 2 or 4 wings like most birds, these creatures fly on rows of modified fins. Study of the balance and principles of these flying fish was cited in the design of the Flyvefisk, which first flew as a racing plane in 1572 under the sponsorship of the growing class of fisher-folk capitalists along the southern coast. The bizarre machine had surprisingly good performance, but remained a niche design. While not yet a participant in the Great War, the dawn of air combat saw the militaries of the Fokker Kingdoms scramble for an armed plane of their own. Among the many hastily militarized designs that entered the war in 1581, the RWA-0 was the most successful, and equivalent to the Gotha C.10. It is suspected that the blueprints of the interrupter gear were one of the concessions the Fokker Kingdoms extracted for joining Gotha's war effort. Based on the very real Bezobrazow triplane, this thing shouldn't work well, but it does, and unfortunately you can't say the same for the many planes in this plane pack. Putting aside its strange look, the Flyvefisk is just another cheap single-gun scout plane. There are planes at the same price range that's faster than the Flyvefisk, more agile than it, and tougher than it, but none are faster, more agile, and tougher than it all at once. Also, it looks pretty unique, and is quite stable due to its wings, though the engine is not that reliable, but that's a problem shared by many planes anyway. Also, it has a rotary engine, so it can be quite effective at dogfighting. As for the variants, there's 2. The original racing plane variant has Schreiber L.7 engine and the gun obviously removed. This plane is far cheaper, but also far slower, while the castor oil shortage has its engine switched to an air cooling Scholz X, which doesn't change its stat much, besides being cheaper, losing some handling, and the rotary bonus. All in all, the Flyvefisk represents another viable option in the category of cheap single-gun scout planes, and if you think the planes here are gonna get better from here on out, you are gonna be disappointed. Next up, we have the Kreuzer Hummer. Yes, you are counting the wings correctly. Roll, Scout, served with, Gotha Empire, first flight, 1592, strengths, handling, stability, weaknesses, visibility, speed. Gotha's 1592 Future Scout program produced a glut of bizarre multiplane aircraft to meet the requirement for 3 or more wings to best the lightweight Macchi Singvogels. The Gotha castor oil shortage meant that lightweight rotary engines were out of the question, so they had to make up the difference with as many wings as possible, and the Kreuzer Hummer was no exception. Finally able to procure the Bertha F-1466 and immediately disappointed by its weight, engineers desperately stacked as many wings as possible in the hope of meeting the impossible turn radius goals. Rumors of the Sonnenjager entry seemed to seal its fate as a runner-up. It was then the design team got a lucky break, as one of Kreutzer's aeronautical engineers happened to be having an affair with the wife of the general overseeing the procurement committee. Through this connection, they were tipped off about the advent of synthetic castor oil and that rotary engines would be accepted after all. In a desperate rush, the Kreutzer team pulled the rear wings off their ungainly creation and slapped a rotary engine on the front, creating the winning Spinna design. The Hummer got a brief second lease on life 2 years later, however, when the failure of Ersatzöl in the Macchi summers saw a need for a water-cooled turn fighter after all. Based on the unfortunately real Fokker V8, some early aircraft designers have the same idea of adding more wings to an aircraft obviously means more lift. Well, it does lift the aircraft, at the cost of speed because of all the drag induced by the wings. The Hummer is just slow, painfully so, and it couldn't really climb well, but at the very least, it can turn very well and is somewhat stable. The other problem it has is that with all the wings in the way, you can't see shit, and also because of all the wings, you do not want to crash in this thing. Look at this wing here, it's just in the perfect position to decapitate the pilot. Still, it does have 2 machine guns, and can eat some bullets without its performance failing dramatically, but, it has a water-cooled engine, so don't get the radiator shot. However, it's just too expensive for its performance. You could either get this thing, or the goddamn Feller Cobra MD at a slightly cheaper price tag. It has no variant, because who the hell would make a variant for this thing? Still, if you absolutely have to get on a plane, there are far worse options that can kill you even more easily. Speaking of options that can kill you more easily, let's continue onward with the Braun XDR Korkenzieher, with more spinning than necessary. Role, Scout, served with, Free City Militia, First Flight, 1587, Strengths, Good All-Rounder, Weaknesses, Risky Investment. Some of the most clever innovations come out of desperation, and the Free City of Kleinhausen was desperate indeed. After decades of resisting UWF expansion into Lohnur, the city found itself directly under the flight path of Gotha bombers. Every night, UWF interceptors would meet the oncoming attackers, and burning planes and discarded bombs fell onto the city below. To enforce their airspace, Kleinhausen turned to Braun to build a plane with the altitude throttle-equipped R.1190 engine from National Motor Bureau East to climb up and catch overhead planes. They could have their war, but somewhere else. To meet speed and handling requirements, 2 engines would be needed, but they could not be placed in the wings. Instead, they were placed in line, one in front and one behind the tiny fuselage. The 2 counter-rotating contra-rotary engines resulted in predictably unpredictable handling characteristics, with the entire character of the plane changing radically depending on which throttle was set where. The plane was very successful in shifting the air war several miles east, and did nothing to stop the subsequent Gotha occupation 6 months later. So, as a brief reminder, contra-rotary engine is rotary engine except the engine block rotates against the propeller and crankshaft to counteract the immense torque that a normal rotary engine would produce. That works. What doesn't work is when you put them in a push-pull format, and now the math gets very complicated, let alone the actual force that would be exerted onto the plane itself. Stability -7 is just barely manageable, if you have a pilot with high comm. If they are not, that -7 will become your current altitude in feet. Also, if you are asking, the real plane the Korkenzieher is based on, the Siemens Skucker DDR.1, is a German plane, always seeking to over-engineer every possible thing ever. However, what you get is a plane that's pretty speedy, very agile, and has twin machine guns to deal with a lot of things, and the engines themselves are quite nice too, with very decent reliability, high ideal altitude range where most engine would start choking, and has altitude throttle that lets you push even more power at low altitude. And if you need to dive onto an unfortunate fellow, you have such a high overspeed that you can do it safely. It's expensive, but I would say it's performance worth the price, but you also have to deal with the fact that it can easily crash, so, pack a parachute, just in case. Last one for this episode, we have the eisterwool. That's not a glass bowl, it's worse. Role, heavy stealth bomber, served with, Gotha Empire, First Flight, 1594, Strengths, excellent view, weaknesses, not stealthy, flammable. While often losing air superiority to the more nimble Macchi scouts, Gotha always had an edge in bomber aircraft and used it to great effect to bomb factories, cities, and various scenic bits of countryside. However, in the summers when Gotha scouts were particularly lacking, there would be a corresponding spike of bomber attrition. When this occurred in summer 1594, many sectors of Gotha's industry were retasked as a stopgap to keep up with losses and keep the raids flying. Enter Eichenfeld Imperial Arsenal, manufacturer of armored skylines and notably not aeroplanes. They built a 3-story monstrosity, with outboard propellers and a bombardier in a basement below the engines. Skinned in transparent cellulose, they reasoned that if Macchi couldn't see them coming, they couldn't intercept them. Unfortunately, while cellulose is transparent, it is also spectacularly reflective, and very flammable. EKA was quietly put back to making trains. So let's talk chemistry. The eisterwool is partially covered in transparent celluloid, a very early form of thermoplastic made out of nitrocellulose and camphor invented in 1855. Camphor is just an organic compound that can be harvested from tree used for medicines, preservatives, and flavors. Nitrocellulose on the other hand is produced by mixing nitric and sulfuric acid with cellulose, from tree, again. Nitrocellulose is also known as flash paper and gun fucking cotton, which was used as a replacement for gunpowder in firearm propellant. That should tell you everything you need to know on why the eisterwool is so fucking flammable. Interestingly enough, the real-life counterpart of eisterwool, the Link Hoffman R.1, has cellin or cellulose acetate for the transparent cover instead. It's a lot less flammable, but it still suffered from reflective issue, as well as having issues like exposure to the sun caused it to yellow, and the temperature difference high in the sky caused it to rapidly shrink or stretch. Ultimately, what killed the plane isn't fire or the non-functional stealth gimmick, it's its wings, lightly built wings so flimsy that a test pilot said that it's not an aircraft, it's a sickness. The control was just too mushy to work. Also, the wing snapped in one of the test flights and killed almost everyone on board. They quickly shelved the project afterward. This also will not be the only plane that killed its own pilot from flimsy wings issue in this plane pack. Looking at its stat, the eisterwool has everything you could expect from a heavy bomber. It's slow, very sluggish, and would not be able to boost or climb anywhere fast. Why the hell is the propeller on bloody bicycle chain? However, it is decently tough, has 3 light machine guns to cover for every incoming approach, 40 bomb mass, which means the eisterwool can carry the second largest payload in flying Circus, a dedicated bombardier with quality 10 bomb sight, as well as a radio operator that can transmit and receive orders from afar, something none of the other heavy bomber has aside from the von Morgenthau. But it's also very flammable, and, again, yes, it's goddamn German, fuck it, here's a tally if you are looking for one. Anyway, don't get set on fire. Also, the bombardier is for some reason the only guy on board in an isolated position, so they will just straight up die if the plane crashes. Ultimately, the eisterwool is actually a decent heavy bomber. I mean, this thing has half the payload of the goddamn Pferd. It's just that it has a tiny problem of being very flammable and also easy to spot because it shines like the sun in daytime. Oh yeah, the crew also have an easier time seeing things because, well, half of the plane is just transparent. There's no variant of this plane, but I can imagine that replacing all the celluloid would make this thing way more useful. And that's all on these 4 airplanes, from the surprisingly effective RWA-0 Flyvefisk that's fast and stable and usable, the baffling Kreuzer Hummer that has too many wings dragging it down, the uncontrollable Braun XDR Korkenseher that's actually pretty good if you can tame it, and the transparent eisterwool that really tried to be the world's first stealth bomber, and fails at it. That's all for now. We got even more worse planes to go, and I will see you all next time. Hello there, if you like this video, please subscribe to my channel and click that notification bell button. If you really want to support my channel, you could visit my Patreon page, or buy me some coffee, links in the description. Anyway, have a nice day.